There are nights when I hold a stranger's heart in my hands, still beating, still fighting, and I think about how my own mother cannot bring herself to say the word surgeon out loud. I have stopped a man from bleeding out on a steel table at 2 in the morning. I have looked into the eyes of a father and told him his daughter would live. And yet, at every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering with people who have known me since I was a child, my mother introduces me the same way. This is my daughter Avery. She works over at the hospital. As if I hand out warm blankets in a waiting room, as if I have never held a scalpel in my life. Welcome back to The Family Revenge Tales. My name is Avery Sutton. I am 38 years old and I am a board-certified trauma surgeon at one of the busiest Level 1 trauma centers in South Carolina. I did not always understand why my mother could not see me, could not say the truth out loud. It took a 4th of July, a lake, and my 6-year-old nephew nearly drowning in front of everyone I love for the truth to finally break the surface. But before I tell you about that day, I need you to understand what came before it, because you cannot appreciate a storm until you have lived inside the quiet that built it. I grew up in a small town outside Greenville, the younger of 2 children. My brother Tyler was 3 years older, loud, charming, the kind of boy who filled a room just by walking into it. I was quieter. I liked books stacked on my nightstand. I liked biology diagrams taped to my bedroom wall. And by the time I was 12, I already knew I wanted to save lives. My parents, Ron and Janice, were good people in most ways. They worked hard. They showed up to Tyler's football games every single Friday night, blankets and thermoses in hand, cheering from the same seats in the bleachers year after year. But something in my mother shifted whenever the subject of medicine came up, some flicker behind her eyes that I did not understand until much later, and for years I simply learned to expect it and move past it quickly, the way you learn to step over a crack in the sidewalk without thinking. When I earned a full academic scholarship to college, my mother smiled, hugged me, told me she was proud, and then spent the rest of dinner asking Tyler about his new job at a construction company, whether the foreman liked him, whether there might be room to move up. When I graduated medical school, my parents did not attend the ceremony. My father called it a scheduling conflict, something about a client meeting that could not be moved. I still remember standing in my cap and gown, scanning a crowd of proud families, snapping photographs, feeling entirely invisible in a sea of people who mattered to somebody. I called home that night, and my mother asked how the drive back would be, whether I would stop for gas before dark. When I became board-certified in trauma surgery, one of the hardest achievements of my life, after years of residency and sleepless call nights and exams that nearly broke me, my mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," in the same tone she used for weather updates, and then asked if I had heard about the custom home Tyler was building on Lake Kiowee, the one with the wraparound porch and the boat slip. I mailed my diploma home once, thinking maybe seeing it framed on a wall would mean something, would make the achievement feel real to the people who raised me. I found out years later it had been sitting in a closet, still in its shipping envelope, gathering dust behind a stack of old holiday decorations, while Tyler's business awards lined the mantel in the living room, polished and proudly displayed for every guest to see. I want to be clear about something. I do not tell you this because I hate my family. I tell you this because for a long time, I stopped fighting for their recognition. I poured everything into my patients instead, into the residents I'd trained, into the operating room where, for a few hours at a time, I mattered completely, where a steady hand and a clear head were the only currency that counted. I told myself it was enough. Most nights, it almost was. What I did not know, not for years, was the real reason behind my mother's denial. It had nothing to do with me at all. When Janice was 17, her father, my grandfather, was injured in a workplace accident at the paper mill where he had worked for 2 decades. He was rushed into emergency surgery, and he never came out of it. Something went wrong on that table, something no one ever fully explained to a grieving teenage girl standing alone in a hospital corridor. She lost her father to a hospital, to doctors in white coats who spoke in terms she did not understand, to a system she never trusted again. I did not learn this until much later, when I found an old journal of his in a box at my parents' house, filled with letters he never sent, describing his fear before that surgery, his hope of watching his daughter grow up. Reading his words, I finally understood. My mother had not diminished my career out of jealousy or cruelty. She had rewritten it in her mind because the alternative, accepting that her own daughter now lived inside the very world that had taken her father from her, was more than she could bear. It became easier to tell herself, and everyone else, that I simply worked at a hospital, rather than admit I was a surgeon standing exactly where death had once taken someone she loved. Understanding that softened my anger. It did not erase it. Tyler built his lakefront house the summer I turned 38, a beautiful place on Lake Kiowee, with a long dock, a stone fire pit, and a wall of windows facing the water. He invited the whole family for the 4th of July, along with half the neighborhood. I had worked 6 days straight that week, back-to-back trauma cases, and I nearly said no. I was tired in a way that lived in my bones. Then my nephew, Ethan, called me himself, his 6-year-old voice bursting with excitement over the phone. "Aunt Avery, you have to come. I can swim all the way to the dock now. I want to show you. Daddy timed me and everything." I could not say no to that. I packed a bag, and out of habit more than anything, I also tucked in a small emergency medical kit and a properly fitted child's life vest, the kind with the collar support. My coworkers joke that I never fully leave the hospital behind, that I would probably check pulses at a wedding if given the chance. They are not wrong. The party was already loud when I arrived, music drifting across the water, the smell of barbecue smoke curling into the summer air. Neighbors gathered along the shoreline in folding chairs, waiting for the fireworks later that night. My mother greeted me with a hug, smelling like sunscreen and the lavender lotion she has worn my whole life, and within minutes she was introducing me to Tyler's neighbors. "This is my daughter, Avery. She helps out over at the hospital." I smiled, the same practice smile I had used for 20 years, and gently corrected her. "I'm a trauma surgeon, actually." Right, she said, already turning to greet someone else, her attention sliding away like water off glass. Later, Monica laughed and said I would make a wonderful daycare owner someday, since I was always so good with the kids, so patient. My father raised his glass and toasted Tyler's success, praising the beautiful homes he built for families all across the county, calling him the pride of the family. Guests clapped. Somebody whistled. Nobody mentioned the family I had just kept whole 2 weeks earlier when I worked a 14-hour trauma case on a teenage boy hit by a truck on Highway 25. A boy who walked out of my hospital alive because a team of us refused to give up on him. Nobody ever does. I have learned to swallow that particular disappointment quietly, like a pill that never quite goes down easy, and smile through it anyway. Even as the afternoon went on, something in me refused to relax. I noticed the children swimming without life jackets, diving and shrieking near the dock pilings. I noticed there was no flotation ring mounted anywhere near the water, no clear sight line from the house to the lake once the adults settled into conversation and their second or third drinks. I found Ethan and knelt down beside him near the water's edge. "Hey, bud. Why don't you wear this vest while you swim? Just for Aunt Avery." "Dad says I don't need it anymore," he said proudly, puffing out his little chest. I'm a really good swimmer now. Watch." Tyler laughed from a few feet away, a beer in his hand. "He's basically a fish, Avery. Relax. You worry too much, you know that?" I did not relax. I never do. It is not a switch I know how to flip. Not after everything I have seen come through those emergency room doors on what should have been an ordinary afternoon, just like this one. While looking for a bathroom inside the house, I found an old cardboard box tucked into a hallway closet, half buried under spare linens. And inside it, my grandfather's journal, the same one I'd seen pieces of before, but this time with more of his letters, more of his private grief written in careful, looping handwriting that had faded to a soft brown with age. I sat on the floor for a few minutes and read entries about a man who loved his daughter fiercely, who wrote about teaching her to fish, about hoping to walk her down the aisle someday, and never got the chance to watch her grow older. I understood my mother a little more in those few minutes than I had in the previous 20 years combined, and something in my chest loosened, just slightly. I walked back outside just as the light was beginning to turn gold over the water, and that is when I heard it. Not screaming, something quieter, more dangerous than screaming. A silence in the wrong place. Ethan had jumped from the end of the dock into deeper water, the way he had all afternoon, except this time he struck his head against the underwater support beam. He went under and did not come back up the way the other children expected. They thought he was playing a game, floating there, holding his breath the way kids do to impress each other. The adults were still talking, still laughing, still entirely unaware, glasses clinking, someone telling a story about a fishing trip. I was already moving before I fully processed what I was seeing. I dove in without stopping to remove my shoes. The water was colder than I expected, murky near the pilings, and I found him within seconds, pulled him up and got him to the dock as fast as I could while stabilizing his neck against my forearm, just in case, my training taking over before fear had the chance to. "Somebody call 911 now," I said, my voice steady even as my hands moved fast. "Tyler, get me a towel. Now." I checked his airway, cleared it, and began rescue breaths. No response. I started compressions, counting under my breath, ignoring the sound of my mother screaming his name behind me, ignoring my sister-in-law sobbing into her hands, ignoring everything except the small body under my hands and the seconds ticking by like hammer blows. "Come on, Ethan. Come on, buddy. Stay with me." On the third round of breaths, he coughed, water spilling from his mouth, and then he cried, the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. I turned him gently onto his side, kept talking to him in a calm voice, checked his pulse, checked his eyes, kept him still and warm until I heard sirens cutting through the evening air. The entire family stood frozen around me, faces pale, hands over mouths. For the first time in my life, when I gave an instruction, no one questioned it. They simply obeyed. The paramedics arrived within minutes. After the lead paramedic examined Ethan and confirmed he was stable, breathing on his own, alert enough to ask for his mother, he turned to the family gathered nearby. Whoever did the initial response, that stabilization was textbook. Most people don't know to protect the neck like that after a possible impact. That quick thinking probably prevented a much worse outcome tonight. My mother, still shaking, wrapped her arms around herself and said quietly, "She's very good with kids." The paramedic looked at her, genuinely confused. "Ma'am, that wasn't luck. That was proper pediatric trauma response, start to finish. Is she in the medical field?" Nobody answered him. We followed the ambulance to Greenville's trauma center, the same hospital where I have worked for the past 9 years, where I know every hallway by heart. We sat in the waiting room under the fluorescent lights, my mother already retelling the story in a smaller version. "Avery happened to know some first aid," she said to a nurse who checked us in. When the emergency room doors opened and Dr. Eleanor Hayes, our trauma chief, walked through in her scrubs, saw me sitting there, and stopped mid-stride. "Avery, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you in scrubs?" "Off duty today," I said quietly, still in my damp clothes. She looked confused for a moment, glancing between me and my family, then turned to them with the easy, matter-of-fact tone she uses on morning rounds. "You all know she's one of the best trauma surgeons this hospital has, right? She just got the state's Trauma Excellence Award last spring. We're actually considering her for Associate Chief of Trauma Surgery next year. If your boy got proper stabilization tonight, it's because Avery gave it to him. And honestly, that's probably why he's going to walk out of here just fine." The waiting room went silent, except for a television murmuring in the corner. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father stared at the floor, jaw tight. Tyler would not meet my eyes. Dr. Hayes had no idea what those words meant. To her, it was simply the truth, spoken the way facts are spoken between colleagues. To my family, it was the truth arriving with nowhere left to hide, no story small enough to fold it back into. That night, in the quiet of the hospital hallway, my mother finally spoke, her voice smaller than I had ever heard her. I think some part of me believed if I never said it out loud, if I never called you a doctor, you'd be safer somehow, like the hospital couldn't take you the way it took my father. "Mom," I said gently, "pretending I wasn't a surgeon never protected me. It just meant I spent 20 years feeling like I didn't exist to you." Tyler admitted, quietly staring at his hands, that he had always known the truth and simply found it easier to stay silent than to challenge our mother, easier to let the family stories stay the way it was. My father apologized for years spent celebrating buildings while overlooking the daughter who had spent a decade rebuilding lives. His voice rough, his eyes wet in a way I had never seen before. Later that evening, I sat beside Ethan's hospital bed while he blinked sleepily up at me, an IV taped to a small hand. "Aunt Avery," he mumbled, "I always knew you were a real doctor. You fix people when they're hurt." I had waited 20 years to hear something close to that from the adults in my family. It arrived instead from a 6-year-old who had never once doubted me, who never needed a title or an award ceremony to know exactly who I was. In the weeks that followed, small changes began. Quietly, the way real change usually does. Tyler framed my medical diploma and hung it in his office, right beside his own certifications. My father came to one of my hospital recognition dinners for the first time in his life, sitting in the front row in an ill-fitting blazer, clapping harder than anyone in the room. Monica apologized, sincerely, for years of careless jokes about daycares and playing nurse. My mother took longer, as I expected she would. Old fear does not dissolve overnight, no matter how loudly the truth is spoken. But one Sunday after church, a neighbor asked about her children, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, she smiled and said, "My son builds beautiful homes, and my daughter, Dr. Avery Sutton, is one of the finest trauma surgeons in South Carolina." She did not explain further. She did not need to. The truth had finally been given the space to stand on its own, and it was more than enough. If you have ever felt invisible in the place that should have seen you most clearly, I hope this story reminds you that your worth was never something your family had the power to grant or withhold. It was already yours, proven every time you showed up, every time you did the hard, quiet work no one applauded. Subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales so we can keep telling stories about the families who finally learned to see each other and the people who never stopped shining even in the dark, waiting patiently for someone to notice. And remember this, wherever you are tonight, the truth does not need permission to exist. It only needs time and the courage to keep living it until someone finally opens their eyes. What is the significant educational or other value in this story? This story illustrates how unresolved generational trauma can silently distort a parent's ability to acknowledge a child's achievements, even when love is genuinely present underneath the denial. It teaches viewers that understanding someone's pain does not require excusing the harm caused by it, and that both truths can coexist during real healing. The story also demonstrates the critical importance of basic emergency preparedness, showing quick recognition of danger, proper neck stabilization, and correct CPR technique can prevent a tragedy in ordinary, everyday settings. Finally, it offers a broader life lesson. Self-worth should never depend on external validation, especially from those who struggle to give it, because true value is proven through consistent action, integrity, and quiet dedication over time.